Hi, everybody. In this sketchbook session, I decided I was going to do something totally different than I normally do. And I will let you guys decide if at the end it still looks different than what I normally work on, or if it looks very much like a Jackie painting. Spoiler alert, it looks pretty much like a Jackie painting. I tried so hard to do something different, but alas. So I'm using a lot of red here with my brayer, just putting some big orb shapes around, and then I smoothed out some paint with that wedge there. Looks a bit like McDonald's so far. I've been getting better about making sure to dry in between layers just to keep my colors pure so that any mixing I do is intentional, not just something that accidentally happens. It's fun to do both, but I'm trying to be really intentional these days. So I'm mixing up some orange warm tones with some quinacridone gold, some yellows, some more of the red. I'm just making these shapes. Apologies if you hear my children watching cartoons in the background. It's just where we are right now today. One of the things that's funny is whenever I use my hairdryer when I'm doing collage, I every single time I turn it on, I forget that all the collage paper on my desk is going to blow away. So if I have any little scraps to turn on the hair dryer, it all smears away. I'm adding this dark gray blue. It's kind of a mixture of phthalo blue, a little bit of white, maybe even some black in here, and maybe some Payne's gray. And I thought I would etch into that layer and draw some little stick figures. Again, my goal was to be totally different in my style this time. I was really enjoying the color, the palette of this dark blue gray against the warmth of the reds and oranges. Holding it up just to get some drips. So this was a day that I felt very free and very experimental and really just wanted to see what would happen, right? Stick figures, very different for me, unless I'm drawing with my children. And I was just willing to try anything. During several points from start to finish in this sketchbook project, um, things looked things took a turn from this orb shape to something totally different coming up, and I left it for a long time. This was actually started in May, and I finished it today in September. I'm sorry, October. It's October now. And it'll be very obvious where the gap is because the paper on my desk there looks very clean. And when you get to October, you'll notice that it does not anymore. So I mixed up a different shade, different shades of this dark blue gray to make it a little bit darker, to give some differentiation in these orb shapes for a little depth. Again, not going for anything in particular, just adding layers. Adding some mark making here. When I was drawing these initially or painting these initially, this kind of reminded me of planets. So some of the marks, even looking at them now, remind me of like if you see an exaggerated picture of the Earth, and then you see, right, New York City has all these tall buildings sticking up out of it, and London has Big Ben, and Sydney has the Opera House. It just reminds me of that. Clearly, my drawings are not as at all realistic like that, but that's just what it reminded me of. See my baby wipes in the lower left corner. I use a ridiculous amount of baby wipes. I'm sure it's not great for the environment, but probably acrylic paint isn't the best either. So, yikes. But they're so useful. They're so easy. So, right or wrong, that's what I use. Now that left orb reminds me of Marvin the Martian. Anyone who was raised in the 70s and 80s remember Marvin the Martian from the Looney Tunes? It reminds me of that little Spartan helmet he wears. It's just a peek inside my brain today, apparently. So in the interest of adding things that are different, I'm trying to have different components in here. I added the collaged yellowish circles. And now I'm trying to warm these up a bit by adding very watered down, I'm not sure that's a yellow ochre, some sort of warm yellowy orange color. And wiping it back just to make it fade in and fade out. Normally I go through and edit out all of the hairdryer sequences just to save some time. So this one, since it's unedited for that, you'll get to see a sense of how often I actually do stop and dry things off. Normally I go as far as I can with mark making and painting until I feel like I don't know what else to do. And then I'll bring the collage in. Because the collage, as soon as I add a piece of collage, it helps me figure out, it gives me something to react to. It helps me figure out what to do next. Using some crayons right now, some Neocolor crayons. Those were not water soluble, so those are Neocolor 2. So I'm actually setting the color with some gloss medium so it doesn't smear all over. And some of the color will disappear when you put the gloss medium on. It'll be like adding water to it a bit. But if you work quickly, you can usually get it to a decent point without losing all of the color. For me, this project really reflects that it doesn't really matter how you start your art in terms of do you have to start the same way every time to make it look like your style. This was a bit of an experiment for me to see how that would work, to see if it would still look like my style at the end, however I made it. And you guys let me know in the comments, but I feel like by the end of this, it does feel like me. Despite my several month gap. It's also okay to put things aside for a while. I don't know about you guys. I often get impatient and want things to be done and be fabulous right away. And sometimes that happens, and that's wonderful. But once it happens, typically I'm like, okay, well, now I can do this every time. Even though that's clearly not how life works. There's no guarantee what it's going to be like next time. But you can always wait. Depends on what you're working toward, right? If you're working toward something that you're really tied into, you really want to put all of yourself into, by all means, work in stages, take your time if you need to. If you're looking for something that's more emotion and expressive and feeling free, then you may have better results if you just go for it and keep working at it without stopping. But it really just depends on your personality, how you work, and what you like to do. The more I create, the more I'm learning that whatever is supposed to be on the paper at the end of the day or the end of the project, it only will get there if I keep working at it. So if I really don't know what to do, I'll put things aside for a little bit. If I'm not sure of a decision, I've been trying to push myself to make a decision on the spot so that I can just move it one step forward. Because in the end, as I've said before, it's only paint and sometimes collage paper. So the more you can push yourself forward when you're not quite sure what you want to do, again, every situation is a little bit different, but if you can push yourself to make one more change or do one more thing, add one more element, if nothing else, you're giving yourself something to react to next time you come back to it. You might hear of some artists will do some drastic thing to a painting. If it's just okay when they leave it next, they'll take, just a bottle of paint and spray, fluid paint across their canvas. So it has this huge, big, garish, paint spill on it, basically. I haven't done that. I haven't really felt the need to do that. Although I have done that when I've come back to canvases that I want to re-explore that weren't successful. But more with paintbrushes. I rarely just spray paint or squeeze paint on the canvas. I'm using this red and orange paper, which is bringing forward, I feel, especially on the right side, the red and orange that are underneath that blue peeking out on the edge. It's adding more of that similar warmth in just a different method. And this is one of the things that I do that really changes things right away is this giant paint marker. Felt like I needed something bold, and this will always add something bold. And I'm not in love with the marks I made right there, but I went for it. I made some big marks, and now I can react to that. Because I'm working on these at the same time, when I feel like it makes sense, I am able to use similar collage pieces on both sides. Certainly don't have to, but it does tie them together. So it's very obvious that they were both made at the same time. Even the color scheme too. It's just one more way to tie them together. But you can see with the same blues and the same orange and red collage pieces, the same white paint on like a paper bag, same black marker, same yellowish background. All right, so this is totally an interruption. I never knew you could just peel paint off of your brayer. I thought it was just stuck on there forever. And while I was working on this, I somehow got an edge free and was able to peel this off, and it looked just like the day I bought it from the store. And it was the best thing I did all day. I was so pleased. So keeping that in there just for fun. And now I have 2 new collage pieces. So these the paint pieces I took off that brayer, I'm now collaging in. Proving once again you can collage anything into art. So I ended up with these pages that, to be honest, I didn't love. And I waited until today. Now I'm in October. You can see how much more paint is on the paper under my desk. And I just needed to quiet things down. So I decided that the first thing I needed to do was add white paint. No real agenda here, just trying to make something happen because I did not like where these ended. Just too much, kind of too much all over. So by taking the white, trying to quiet things down and carve into some of the paint just to see that line form with the colors of the paper and paint underneath it. Instantly, huge difference. Certainly not done, but a very big difference, at least getting some of that, the bold colors quieted down, which also allows the other bold colors to shine a little bit more. I left the paint a bit thicker so I could make that line through the paint. So then drying it's a little bit more important. But now I decided there was too much white. So in order to correct that, I got some blacks. So I'm using 2 different blacks. One is carbon black, which I'm using currently with this brayer. The other one's a bone black. The carbon black is very opaque, so you can't see through that. The bone black is a bit more transparent. You can see what's underneath it. Use a bit of water sprayed on to get some of the white coming through. I've never done this before to my knowledge, but I just used the edge of the brayer and used it to make lines. It's really fun. If you haven't done it, I highly recommend it. So now I'm really able to shape things make some compositional choices. Whereas before I was just adding collage and not thinking so much about composition. But now that I'm getting much closer to the end and feeling much closer to the end, it was important to me to start thinking about where I wanted darks, where I wanted lights, and then where to keep those mid-tone values. Adding a little bit of the bone black, you can see it's not quite as dark as the carbon black. Carving into that. And because I'm using open paints for these two, they stay wet and workable for much longer. So I can continue carving in long after I've put them on. If you use those, make sure that you do dry it with a hairdryer or you will smear everything. All right, so I hope that you can see that you can always go back to old work. You can always add on to it. You can always, I don't know if fixing it's the right word, but you can always improve it. And I encourage you to experiment. Bye, everybody.